Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the life of someone whose name is just synonymous with a huge shift in history.
J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Exactly. Often called the father of the atomic bomb.
And for this exploration, we're basically drawing from his Wikipedia page. It gives a really solid overview of his life, his science, the whole Manhattan Project story, and, well, the complicated stuff that came after.
Right. Our goal here is to go a bit beyond that famous title. We want to unpack, his scientific mind, what it meant to lead that world-changing project, and also the personal and political storms he faced later on.
We'll look at his early academic brilliance, his leadership at Los Alamos, his post-war work, that infamous security hearing, and kind of the enduring questions his life leaves us with.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Julius Robert Oppenheimer, born in New York City, April 22, 1904. An interesting background, right? Non-observant Jewish family, father a wealthy textile importer.
Yeah, not what you might immediately picture. And he wasn't just science-focused early on. He loved literature, English, French, even mineralogy, apparently.
Yeah.
Super bright kid, skipped grades.
Definitely. But then there was that illness, colitis,
Right.
that delayed him going to Harvard.
It did, but that delay actually led him to New Mexico for recovery.
And that's where he fell in love with the Southwest. Crucial later on.
Absolutely. That landscape stuck with him. So he
Huh.
gets to Harvard in 22, starts in chemistry, but pretty quickly pivots to advanced physics, clearly where his passion was.
And he flew through it summa cum laude in just 3 years. That's
Extremely
like
fast. He was already doing graduate level work through independent study. Then he heads off to Europe for further study.
which sounds like it was a bit of a mixed bag initially. Cambridge wasn't quite right.
Not at all, apparently. He found the lab work there really tedious, felt he wasn't learning. There's even that kind of dramatic story about a poisoned apple for his tutor, though maybe not fully confirmed. Yeah, suggests he was pretty unhappy. He actually sought psychiatric help then, too. So, real struggles.
So it wasn't just academic frustration,
Yeah.
but then Göttingen, under Max Born, that was different.
Oh, completely. Göttingen was like the world center for theoretical physics then. He absolutely thrived there. Met people like Heisenberg, Teller, made connections.
Though apparently he was maybe a little too enthusiastic in discussions.
Huh. Yeah, there's that story about the petition from other students asking him to maybe let others talk a bit more in seminar.
That's intense. But he gets his PhD there super young, right? 23.
Just 20 through. And crucially, he and Born developed the Born-Oppenheimer approximation. That's probably his most significant early contribution, wouldn't you say?
Definitely the most cited. What exactly did it do in simple terms?
Well, it's key for quantum mechanics in molecules. Basically, it lets you mathematically separate the movement of the big, slow atomic nuclei from the fast-moving electrons. Which sounds technical, but it meant scientists could suddenly tackle these incredibly complex molecular equations. Made them manageable, approximate, but accurate. It really opened up modern chemistry, understanding chemical bonds, reactions. Shows his brilliance early on.
Wow. So from that breakthrough, where did he go next professionally?
He came back to the U.S., got a fellowship, split his time between Caltech and Harvard. At Caltech, he got close with Linus Pauling.
Ah, another big name.
Huge! They planned to collaborate on chemical bonding theory, Oppenheimer doing the math. But that partnership kind of blew up after a bit of an awkward personal situation involving Pauling's wife.
Oh, really? Seems like personal dynamics could be tricky for him sometimes.
It appears so. He spent more time in Europe after that Leiden Zurich, even lectured in Dutch in Leiden.
And got the nickname Op-G.
Yep, which his American students later turned into Oppie. Suggests he had a certain charisma. He also worked with Wolfgang Pauli in Zurich, someone he really admired.
Then back to the States, to Berkeley.
Right, took a professorship at UC Berkeley, and this was really where he hit his stride as an educator. Hugely popular with students.
They admired his exquisite taste in physics problems. I love that phrase.
Me too. It suggests more than just smarts, like an intuition for what really mattered. He mentored a whole generation of physicists there.
And he collaborated with Ernest Lawrence too, right? At the radiation lab.
Yeah, providing the theoretical firepower to complement Lawrence's experimental work with the cyclotrons, he became a full professor by 36.
And his research in this period was incredibly broad.
Amazingly so. Theoretical astronomy thinking about neutron stars, black holes way back then.
The Tolman-Oppenheimer-Volkoff limit, the Oppenheimer-Snyder model for collapsing stars. That's incredible foresight.
It really is. Then there's nuclear physics, the Oppenheimer-Phillips process, explaining deuteron reactions. quantum field theory. He even predicted the positron before it was actually found.
It sounds like he was touching almost every hot topic in theoretical physics.
He really was, though it's noted his papers could be mathematically dense and maybe sometimes prone to errors, perhaps because he works so fast.
His physics was good, but his arithmetic awful, as one student apparently said.
Chuckles. Something like that. It's also noticeable that his pure scientific output slowed down quite a bit after World War II.
Right, because his focus shifted more towards leadership, like at the Institute for Advanced Study.
Exactly, a big transition. Which kind of brings us to his private and political life. Apparently, he was pretty detached initially.
Yeah, the sources say he didn't really follow the news, claimed he only learned about the Wall Street crash months later, didn't even invade until 36.
But the 1930s changed that. The rise of Nazism, the Spanish Civil War, that got his attention.
He started actively supporting anti-Nazi groups, the Spanish Republicans.
Yes, donating part of his salary to help refugee physicists from Germany. And he got involved with various groups that were seen as progressive, but later tagged as Communist Front organizations.
And this is where things get complicated, politically speaking.
Yeah.
His associations.
Very much so. He had close ties to people in the Communist Party USA, his brother Frank, his wife Kitty eventually, Jean Tatlock, who he was involved with.
But was he ever actually a member himself? That's debated, isn't it?
Heavily debated. There's no definitive proof, like a party card. But some evidence suggests he might have been a concealed member for a while in the late 30s. He was part of this faculty discussion group at Berkeley that some later said was a secret party unit.
Regardless of formal membership, the FBI certainly noticed these connections.
Oh, yeah. They opened a file on him in 41, put him on their watch list, basically.
And then, on that security questionnaire for the Manhattan Project, he wrote he'd been a member of just about every Communist Front organization.
Which he later tried to walk back as a joke, a half-jocular overstatement.
But that inconsistency would come back to bite him, wouldn't it?
Big time. During the security hearing, his personal life was tangled up in this, too. Jean Tatlock, with her strong communist ties, marrying Kitty Poining, a former party member herself, even rekindling the affair with Tatlock during the war years, all fuel for later scrutiny.
And amidst all this political and personal complexity, he develops this deep interest in Hindu philosophy, the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, quite profoundly. He learned Sanskrit to read it in the original, often cited it as a major influence on his philosophy of life.
Which famously connects to his reaction at the Trinity test.
Exactly. That quote, "Now I am become death, the shatterer of worlds," is straight from the Gita. It just shows another layer of his incredibly complex mind, cutting-edge science, and ancient spiritual texts coexisting.
So that leads us right into the Manhattan Project. He's recruited in 42, which, given those associations we just discussed, seems, well, surprising.
It really does seem surprising in hindsight. Initially, he was focused just on the bomb physics calculations, but by 43, General Groves picks him to direct the whole Los Alamos lab.
Despite the security flags, despite him having zero experience managing something that huge.
Yep. Groves apparently saw past all that. He recognized Oppenheimer's unique grasp of the science and, as Groves put it, his overweening ambition, which he thought was needed to drive the project. Groves essentially overruled the security concerns, said Oppenheimer was absolutely essential.
And Los Alamos became this incredible, intense melting pot of scientific talent. The luminaries, as he called them.
An absolutely unprecedented gathering of minds. And Oppenheimer was the one who had to pull it all together, manage the science, the military side, the sheer complexity. He really excelled at understanding all the moving parts.
Overseeing the actual bomb designs, too.
Yeah.
Including that critical shift for the plutonium bomb, right?
Yes, the original Thin Man gun-type design wouldn't work for plutonium because of Pu-240 contamination they discovered. They had to pivot, develop the complex implosion design for Fat Man, while the uranium bomb, Little Boy, stuck with the simpler gun design.
Two very different paths to the same terrifying result. And the test site, Trinity, named after John Donne's poetry. Another link to his literary side.
It is. He was there, of course, for that first test, July 16, 1945. And that's when he recalled the Gita quote.
Now I am become death, the shatterer of worlds. Just chilling, thinking about that moment. The weight of it.
It perfectly captures the awe, the power, and maybe the horror of what they'd unleashed, because after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he clearly expressed deep revulsion, advocated for banning these weapons.
He had that difficult meeting with President Truman, reportedly saying he felt he had blood on his hands.
Which Truman did not react well to, by all accounts. But despite Oppenheimer's growing moral qualms, he received the Medal for Merit in 46 for his leadership.
Because the war ends, and he becomes this major public figure, a voice for science in the new atomic age, advocating for international control.
He does. Takes the helm at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton in 47, fosters intellectual work there for almost 20 years, and he chairs the General Advisory Committee, the GAC, for the new Atomic Energy Commission.
Using that position to push for arms control,
Yeah.
basic science funding.
Exactly. But then comes the H-bomb debate.
Right. He strongly opposed pushing ahead with the hydrogen bomb development in 1949.
He did, along with the rest of the GAC, both on ethical grounds, seeing it as a purely genocidal weapon, and practical ones. He questioned its military necessity.
But Truman decided to go ahead anyway. That must have created a real rift.
A huge one. It highlighted a fundamental disagreement on strategy and signaled a break with figures pushing for massive retaliation capabilities. And this opposition, combined with his past, really set the stage for the security hearing.
The 1954 hearing.
Yeah.
Triggered by that letter from William Borden alleging he was essentially a Soviet agent.
Which was a baseless accusation, but it kicked things off. The hearing dug deep into all those old communist associations, his connections to people under suspicion, and critically, his opposition to the H-bomb.
And his own testimony, particularly about the Haakon Chevalier incident. That didn't help him, did it?
Yeah.
The inconsistencies in his story.
No, his shifting accounts over the years about whether Chevalier had approached him to pass secrets really damaged his credibility with the board. It looked evasive, even dishonest to them.
And Edward Teller's testimony against him, that was a major factor too.
Very damaging. Teller's testimony was seen by many scientists as ambiguous at best, perhaps deliberately harmful. It led to Teller being widely shunned by the scientific community afterwards, but it contributed to the outcome.
Which was the AEC revoking his security clearance.
Yes, a stunning fall for someone who had been so central just years before. Many historians now see that hearing as deeply flawed, politically driven, a real low point in how science and politics interacted during the Cold War.
So after losing his clearance, he retreated somewhat, spent time in the Virgin Islands.
Yes, lived part-time in St. John. He continued to give public lectures talking about science and society, but he was effectively shut out of government policy circles.
Did he become a vocal anti-nuclear protester then?
Interestingly, no. While he clearly had deep concerns, he didn't sign on to the major protest movements of the 50s like the Russell-Einstein Manifesto.
But there was a gesture of rehabilitation later, the Enrico Fermi Award in '63.
Awarded by President Johnson, yes, seen by many as a way to acknowledge his past contributions and maybe implicitly critique the earlier hearing, though the controversy never fully died down during his lifetime.
He was diagnosed with throat cancer not long after that.
In '65, yes. He passed away in 1967, only 62.
And his ashes were scattered near his home in St. John. A quiet end. The family story after that is quite sad, too.
It is. His wife, Kitty, died a few years later in '72, and then his daughter, Tony, tragically committed suicide in 1977. Just adds another layer of sorrow.
His legacy is just so complex, isn't it? He's become this symbol for scientists grappling with moral responsibility, the dangers of technology, how politics can impact science.
Absolutely. Often seen as this tragic figure caught between scientific discovery and its devastating consequences, and also caught in the political crossfire, a cautionary tale in many ways.
And the fascination continues. Biographies, plays, and of course, the recent big film. People are still trying to understand him.
Definitely. And significantly, in 2022, the U.S. Secretary of Energy formally vacated that 1954 decision to revoke his clearance.
Acknowledging the process was flawed.
Exactly. A very late but formal recognition of the injustice. And while he never got a Nobel Prize, his early physics work, especially in astrophysics, those ideas about neutron stars, black holes, is now seen as incredibly important and pioneering.
They even named an asteroid and a lunar crater after him.
Right. So his scientific legacy is secure, even separate from the bomb.
So, J. Robert Oppenheimer's story, when you really dive into it like we have, using the details from sources like his Wikipedia page, it's just a stark reminder, isn't it? How science, power, and individual conscience are all tangled together.
Completely. From that incredible early theoretical work, right up to leading the Manhattan Project and then facing those brutal post-war challenges, his life really holds up a mirror to the huge dilemmas of the 20th century, and those dilemmas haven't gone away. The questions about scientists' ethics are arguably more relevant than ever.
We hope this deep dive has shed some light on his incredibly complex journey. Maybe it encourages you, the listener, to explore more about him. What part of Oppenheimer's story stands out most to you? What questions does it leave you with? Because really, understanding him is still an ongoing process.